Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's a very, very special interview with Carnegie Mellon Mumbai with our special guest speaker, Vineet Agarwal, who is the MD of the Transport Corporation of India, as well as the president of ASSOCHAM. My name is Ashay Doshi. I will be hosting the interview today along with Yash, who will be running Q&A. Before we start, to welcome Vineet, I would invite Rekha Koita, who is the head of the CMU Mumbai Alumni Association, to welcome Vineet and all our guests joining us today.
Thank you, Ashay, and thank you, Vineet, for taking the time out and hosting this, not hosting, but for gracing us with your presence and giving your insights to not just CMU alums, but a much wider community whom we've been able to invite and get on board. So thank you very much for taking out this time, and we all look forward to this evening. Like to also mention here, for those of you who don't know, that this evening is also special because not only because Vineet is special and his, what he's going to discuss is going to be very interesting, but he's also a CMU alum. So I think that for me puts this webinar in the special category also. And thank you very much, Ashay, for putting this together. And thank you, Yash, for, being the co-host and helping out, and all your efforts in this. So with this, let me just hand it over to Ashay again, and please take this ahead.
Great. Thank you, Rekha. And just to piggyback of what Rekha said, this evening is special, not only because we have Vineet and he's a CMU alum, but because as a country, we're coming out of a pandemic where a lot of sectors that were important before became essential. And the transport and logistics sector is one sector that really played a vital role in India coming out of this pandemic. And we have revolutionaries like Vineet and TCI who have really taken the supply chain logistics industry to the next level. The TCI group is the largest multimodal transport company in India. To give you context, it moves 2.5% of India's GDP by value through its network across 6,000 employees and 1,400 offices. In addition to that, Vineet is also the president of ASSOCHAM, the Associated Chambers of Commerce, that is India's apex trading body that provides policy guidance as well as represents business interests with the government of India. It has 4.5 lakh members, and Vineet is, I think, probably one of the youngest presidents ever, taken over from Mr. Hiranandani, and first from CMU to take over. So with that, Vineet, a big welcome to you. Before we start, I'd love to invite you to say a few words to our CMU community, to our family and friends and everyone who joined us.
Thank you so much, Ashay, for having me over, Rekha, Yash, and for the very flattering introduction. I end up doing some interviews here and there for the purpose that I'm currently in the position that I am. But this is the most special one because this is alumni, this is school, and that always has a special place everywhere and anywhere at any time. So I'm looking forward to this as much as you are.
Awesome. Thank you, Vineet. And just to go over the format real quick, there will be 45 minutes of me interviewing Vineet, followed by the Q&A session. So I'd encourage everyone watching to look at the Q&A box at the bottom, and please keep putting your questions. Towards the end, Yash and Rekha will re-emerge from the video and we will run the Q&A session. So why don't we quickly get started, Vineet? So before we jump into the topic of today, which is the transformation of the supply chain industry, I'd love to understand, your position as ASSOCHAM president. What is your unique agenda with it coming in? And how are you looking to elevate the cooperation between the private sector and the government?
I think the organization like ASSOCHAM has a very important role in the country's development growth agenda. We are a 101-year-old organization, and our 4 areas of focus are entrepreneurship, digitization, sustainability, and empowerment. And the idea is that we act like a bridge between government and industry and businesses, because there is a lot of feedback that needs to flow both towards the government and towards industry in terms of what needs to be done And that feedback is important because it helps in policy setting, in looking at the direction. It looks at lots of areas in terms of the future for the country, future of the country. Our unique positioning as ASSOCHAM is always that we bring very practical and on the ground approach to things. So, when we are talking to the bureaucrats, to the ministers, they really seek out our suggestions because we're getting it directly from members on the ground.
Correct.
The 4.5 lakh members that you mentioned are people who we reach out to for suggestions and feedback, and that is greatly appreciated. So the impact is huge. The impact is national and in many ways international. It is important for our country to be recognized globally and to be on that stepping stone for as a superpower. So we need organizations like ASSOCHAM to really put that agenda forward.
Absolutely. And, you took over in December as ASSOCHAM president, and we had probably one of the most revolutionary budgets we've had in the last decade or more since 1991 under this past month. And, you in your interviews, you mentioned you had areas of focus such as investment in infrastructure, agri supply chain, and the trickle down effect of this spending. So in your view, did it, satisfy ASSOCHAM's expectations in terms of the budget? I know you met with Mr. Sitharaman this past week as well. And so what are your view on how you think the budget went? What does it mean for growth in the country? And I'll ask some follow-up questions on that.
Yeah, the budget is really, I think, one of those unique things that the government puts out. And of course, if you've been following the budget, it used to always happen at the end of February and used to be preceded by a railway budget and so on. And the government has really turned it all around and said, 1st of February, and we'll present all the budgets for the country.
Right.
And so I've been watching the budget for the last 25 years of being active in the business, and it's been quite a change. And this budget was unique because firstly, there were no increases in taxes. I think everyone's expecting something happening there. Yeah. So something was so the stability that the government has indicated in terms of its tax structure and tax rates is very positive, not just for domestic investors, but also for foreign investors. Right. Our tax rates are one of the lowest in the world right now, amongst the lowest in the world.
Right.
There is a real concerted effort towards thinking about long-term growth. And I fundamentally believe that whatever the path that the government has put us on, irrespective of whichever government is in place, doesn't really have a choice now, because voters are going to vote for growth. And if you promise them growth, show them growth, they will vote for you. So,
right.
So I think that agenda is very critically getting linked up. What the challenge is, obviously, with anything like this is execution.
Right.
In anything, execution is critical, and that's where we see, the difference between the cup and the lip. So we have to, and the feedback that we've given also from Chamber is set up the execution protocols much better, view that, monitor it as any corporation would do.
Right.
You cannot allow cost overruns. You cannot allow time overruns. We have to work on that speed and that focused methodology. So it is challenging, but I think we are as a country really scaling up right now in terms of where we want to be.
Right.
And the trend for this budget is really getting us there.
Absolutely. And I saw Mr. Modi's speech in the Lok Sabha batting for the private sector. I think that in itself raised the sentiment for sure. I know you mentioned something about the agri supply chain, building better roads and infrastructure. And I work in the agriculture field, so that excites me. But one question I always have for any government policy or someone in the business world is India's stubborn cost of capital. Your interest rates are relatively higher than compared to other countries. Your spread between interest rate and inflation is over 5 to 6%. So from an Asocham's perspective, to encourage entrepreneurs and encourage business, and how do you see this cost of capital and reduction of interest rates coming in so that it incentivizes people to take a risk and not be afraid of high interest rates, and to be not as safe as in put their money in the fixed deposit, invest in starting a business. So do you have any views on that cost of capital angle? This is a personal observation on that.
So 25 years ago, I remember, when I joined the business at that time, we were going through a bit of a crisis, and we also borrowed money at 30%.
Wow.
So, I mean, now it seems like a dream when my company's cost of capital is less than 7%. However, I think, and we know, when we go to CMU, economics is also drilled into our heads.
Right.
And you cannot have interest rates lower without lower inflation. And little bit of inflation in a growing country is important also.
Right.
Because then your prices keep moving up a little bit by little.
Right.
So that way, I think we are possibly getting closer to the bottom in terms of the interest rates. Perhaps maybe 1% or 2% here and there perhaps should help, but I think the overall way of how we can be more competitive, other than interest rates, is also what we need to see.
Right.
So this is one factor, interest rates, but there are lots of other factors we all know of. And I can tell you one simple thing that can make us very competitive as a country is the energy security.
Right.
Almost all enterprises in India or any critical business in India will have a generator.
Right.
We have a generator because we are not confident about our energy security. We are not sure that the power will be there all the time.
Right.
So if that confidence was there, we would not keep generators. Why does the entire telecom towers, all those towers run on gensets? We run cold chains, and for a cold chain, it's absolutely critical that power should be there at all times. For that, we have a generator. But I also have a backup of that generator, because if the generator fails, I cannot let the product fail.
Right.
So that increases my cost overall. And that makes us as a country uncompetitive. So there are lots of areas that we can think about where we can sweat that capital better.
Right.
Would be possibly the right way to look at it, rather than only looking at the interest cost.
Right. Yeah, that's a fascinating point. I hadn't thought about it that way at all. And so this is a perfect segue into the execution angle, specifically related to logistics and TCI. Again, for all our audience, we've got great numbers today. Please keep on putting your questions in the Q&A box as we move forward. We will be doing Q&A in half an hour from now. So Vineet, you mentioned about execution, and execution in India, especially being a challenge now that you've had good policies. So from a logistics overview point of view, so TCI is the largest company, but in the overall picture, the organized sector in logistics in India is around 10 to 15%. India is a country that has every 200 kilometers, your language changes, culture changes, your on-ground practices change. So in terms of standardizing processes, executing in a very, very consistent way, how does TCI look at execution in India? And what do you think are the biggest opportunities and challenges in that space?
So in 1999, we formed a joint venture with a Japanese company called Mitsui.
Right.
And this is a company that was set up in Bangalore, and it is one of the most successful joint ventures in the logistics spaces in India with the Japanese company. And this was to handle the logistics of Toyota in Bangalore, from the Bangalore plant.
Right.
And Toyota is one of the, if you read about the Toyota production system, the TPS, extremely high on quality, extremely high on process and Kaizen and lean management.
Right.
And of course, one of the components of lean management is low inventory.
Right.
So low inventory would mean that if there is a car that's getting produced, and if you remember, I mean, I'm a lot older than many people here, but the first car that Toyota came out was the Qualis.
Qualis, of course.
And so Qualis was quality, basically started with the word quality. And the idea was that how, if the suppliers are all over the country, how can we get the parts just in time to the plant?
Correct.
So, when we were sitting with the discussion with the Japanese, and they said, you have to get it just in time. And I said, yeah, we'll get it just in time. The truck will come a few hours earlier and wait. And as soon as the plant opens up, you want that particular truck, it'll roll in. They said, no, that doesn't work. Because that means that the inventory is going to be sitting in and around Bangalore till you call it in, and that's a cost. We wanted to reach maybe an hour or two before as we need it. And we were thinking, my team and everyone, that 1999, no GPS,
right,
limited cell phone capacity.
Right.
How are we going to get things delivered on time?
Right.
And it was just that whole practical experience of planning that really helped us to get this going, which meant that we mapped out every single roadblock and every single route, every single bump that would be there. And so that we had a plan A, we had a plan B, and we had a plan C.
In 1999. Wow.
In 1999. Plan A for us was to get the truck. So we would be having these hubs, and in Gurgaon, in Chennai, in Pune, from the auto clusters, and collect the material, put them into bigger trucks, and send it to the plant in Bangalore. And in one of those instances, we are getting tires from a specific company, and the truck had a failure. So we sent the backup truck, and the backup truck also had a failure.
Oh, wow. It's plan B.
So plan C kicked in, which meant airlifting tires at our cost, so that the plant doesn't stop production.
Wow.
And so that was the kind of dedication that we put into the service quality, that we were at 2001, we were running at 99.9% service levels, and we're running that till now for the last 20 years. And Toyota says that the amount of money they've saved in inventory cost is just massive. So what I was getting to is that it is possible to do it irrespective of whatever be the situation.
Right.
Homogenization of service and service quality is key in scaling up.
Correct.
If you have to grow as an organization, you have to ensure that your service quality is precise every single time. It cannot be, the 200-kilometer thing does not apply to certain things. It applies to retailers perhaps, but not to service delivery companies like us.
Correct.
And just to take another example around it is that the government also started in the early 2000s with the National Highway Program.
Right.
The Golden Quadrilateral, etc.
Yep.
And we felt that let's find out the efficacy of these highways. And in 2008, we commissioned a study with IIM Calcutta, and we found out the average speed of a truck in India was 23 kilometers per hour.
Wow.
And so we realized that, that's not how things are. That's the reality, but how can we work around it?
Correct.
So we used to have double drivers, triple drivers, so that the truck is moving constantly. Right. The last survey we did, and this is a survey that comes out every 3 years, the average speed was close to 40 kilometers per hour. So it has substantially improved, but service quality is something that it has been key in terms of even our company's growth story.
Absolutely, and I think you brought a very, very interesting point about that study. I actually read that IIM study. I think you did one in 2008 and you did one in 2013 and 14 as well. But adding the government angle to it right now, as from the national logistics policy, there's 14% expenditure on the transport sector. The government is looking to reduce it to 10%. So how do you envision private participation? when utilization, your capacity utilization, as you said, like you have at 99.9%, but most unorganized, 80% of the transport industry is unorganized and is probably running at 50%. So how do you envision that private-public partnership in this space? And adding to that quick question, I just read a stat that only 2% of our roads in India are highways. The rest is local roads. So 2% is national highways. So how do you envision that public-private partnership?
Yeah, so 99.9% is for that specific business, and of course, certain other businesses do have a very high degree of service quality. But yeah, so bringing down the overall cost of logistics in the country has a lot of components. So first, you have to understand what is logistics cost. It is transportation costs, it's warehousing costs, it's inventory management costs, it's packaging costs, and all of this in the chain. So in a pipeline, in a supply chain pipeline, inventory is sitting everywhere. And inventory is sitting everywhere because you do not, again, going back to the energy security issue, you do not trust the transport elements to say that, is this particular inventory available when I want it? Versus, I don't need it right now, let it sit there and I'll just take it when I want it. So with that, clearly the challenges are throughout the supply chain. So on the transportation side, you have challenges with fuel prices. Fuel prices are very high, and that adds to the cost. In a truck, 40% of operating cost is fuel. And our modal mix as a country is completely skewed. So 60-65% of our cargo moves through road. It move through rail or through the coast. In China, for example, a lot of that happens. It's about 25% 30% by road, and 20-25% by rail, and 20-25% 30% by the coast. So that if that modal mix changes more towards the other modes, your cost will come down. It's also green logistics because there's less carbon emission. Then you have to cut down the inventory. So which means better practices in terms of how you're handling cargo, which also means that you have to move towards things like containerization. Now, only about 10-15% of the material today, not even 10%, about 10% moves through containerized mode. So if you've seen people really carrying those packages, so it's head load, moving by head load at distributors' end, at wholesalers' end, versus pallets. Versus containerizations. So when you have containerization and palletization, which would mean that automatically when you're emptying trucks, you can do it much faster. So the turnaround time for the truck improves, and hence improves efficiency and productivity, and hence brings down the cost. And last but not least is the overall cost of infrastructure. I think a lot of the highways have improved, but the first mile and last mile has not really improved. If you see going from Mumbai to Pune, I have done that many times, and you actually end up spending more time getting out of Mumbai than on the highway. So, or getting into Pune and vice versa. So that's true for almost every part of the country. So there we lose out a lot of time, a lot of cost. So investing into the right infrastructure is critical, not necessarily more infrastructure. So government keeps saying, we're building 35 kilometers of roads a day, 40 kilometers of roads a day. But the question that we always ask is that, is it the right infrastructure? Are you building, another example of that is Delhi has about three ring roads around the city. Beijing has 8. So that means that traffic doesn't need to go into the city. You have to stop it at a certain point, and then it has to go out around it. So like this, there are lots of areas where logistics costs can be controlled or brought down, which are mostly efficiency driven. And 2% that you mentioned for highways, that number is critically growing fast. And we are seeing that the government investment into expressways specifically, which are access controlled, so that you don't have You don't have someone coming in. You don't have a bullock cart going this way or something crossing
Correct.
you. You
Correct.
maintain your speed. Those things are also happening.
Right. That's fascinating in terms of insights into what goes on into a cost. And in terms of government and big bag reforms, GST is one angle. Again, you focused in your um, sort of comments on the budget as well, GST rationalization. But when GST came out, and the effect of it today is that when I was a kid, when I used to travel across India, we used to always stop at every toll naka. There was octroi stopping, there was inspection. After GST, trucks have started traveling 100 to 150 kilometers more every single day in India, an average truck, which is huge. So if you had to point out, I mean, uh, that's huge reform as well, along with the fast tags that are coming in. What else would you want to see as a big bang reform that can have that impact like this GST that really trailblazed reform?
So GST still requires a lot more reform in the sense that we all know that the number of tax rates are very high, or in some cases very low, and also too many. So there is a lot of discussion between the government to really move things into a more simplified structure. So that would be critical. Big bang reforms, FASTag is huge. That same study that I mentioned, the last study that we did, we came out with a number that India loses about 88,000 crores because trucks are standing at toll points. And the FASTag is something that the minister really took this up as a initiative that we have to reduce this loss substantially.
Right.
And now with FASTags being mandatory, otherwise cost is going to, I mean, you have to otherwise pay double the toll.
Right.
Is absolutely the things in the right direction. So that's one. The right infrastructure is what I mentioned. I think those are important. Multimodal, moving towards different modes is critical. Containerization is important. And then we have to start thinking about behavioral changes.
Right.
How people's behavior is changing when it comes to commerce, online commerce, and so on and so forth. And how can we build infrastructure around that?
Right.
Because cities are going to be places where there's going to be a lot of deliveries, but
Right.
there are no facilities that are mandated by the government to say, okay, this is a facility that will be exclusive for logistics in the center of the city, because you need that delivery system as well.
Right.
So yeah, so I think a lot of changes around the real estate side will also help the industry pick up faster.
Right. Thanks. I think it's what's fascinating to understand from talking to someone like your experiences, how connected the dots are to make a change. It's not only one lever that is pulled, that's multiple levers that have to be turned for an end result to happen. This is a great segue into how the industry is changing and how TCI has changed. No interview in this time would be complete without talking about the COVID pivot. And when we went into lockdown, um, the national highways and roads were the only thing for essential services that were moving. We particularly work in grape exports, and we did 1/3 the volume last year, and this year freight rates have doubled, sea freight rates. So for TCI, what are the biggest challenges you faced during COVID? How did you attack them? How did you pivot? And how did you ultimately, as you've seen, come out fighting and come out stronger? And what did you learn?
So yes, on March 25th, which was the day of the lockdown, I think before that only we actually started having our first Zoom call meetings. So much before that, and we started activating the teams because we had more than 2,000 trucks still on the road which had not reached their destination. So the idea was get them as fast as possible to their destination or get a track of where they are.
Correct.
Unfortunately, it doesn't happen as we think it will. It took almost 4 or 5 months for the last truck to get to its final destination, because the driver somewhere had left the truck and gone to his hometown, etc., and he couldn't come back. But our people really stood their ground in many places, because there was no differentiation between essentials and non-essentials for us. If you
Right.
remember those days that, okay, essentials can move, and then you have to get passes.
Yeah.
And so it all seemed like a dream, but it all happened. And we were at the thick of it, trying to get passes and get people to go and move. There was a lot of fear, so we equipped people with masks. We gave them soaps so they could wash their hands, constantly send sanitizers and all the necessary stuff right away. And our corporate office actually started, our other offices started rolling out in the first week of April itself.
Okay.
And in May, first week, our corporate offices started. I've been going to office since May myself, and all the senior team members as well. What we realize is that the disease is there. It is there to stay, but we need to be ready. We need to be cautious.
Right.
And we did, I don't know how many, but thousands and thousands of calls at Zoom meetings for training people in terms of protocols. We moved a lot of our other training to digital means. For example, how do you sell digitally? Customers are not willing to meet you, but how do you sell digitally? So we created a program around that, and we trained people on it. We made in the first 3 months almost 60,000 phone calls to customers, just asking them, how are you? Is there any way we can help you? And also a side note that we ask them, you have some money pending with you, can you give us money? So we were able to increase our collections very rapidly, and we had surplus cash that we were sitting on for the first, even till now, because we were able to increase the receivable collection. But business did fall, but we took a conscious call that we will not cut anyone's salary. We did not lay off anyone. And as of last month, we've also released increments for all other than the top 50, but we've released increments for everyone. We've also released ESOPs for the top people, so that there is, because the businesses come back, we've been able to do this more efficiently. But there are, of course, a lot of changes. If I talk a little bit more broadly, from an industry perspective, there are companies that are now saying that I want to keep more safety stock because I want to add more warehousing capacity for the safety stock because I do not know what will happen. In a supply chain, it's a classic supply chain bullwhip effect that happens. So when you've really run out of inventory and there's demand, you say, Acha, just produce 100 because you're seeing that demand is going to be 100. But if demand is only 80, you are left with more stock. Correct. Or you either overproduce or you under sell. So there are lots of things that have started happening. So customers want that. More warehousing space has increased. Omni-channel has increased. We are all shopping a lot more online. Right. And this is a trend that is now almost permanent, I would say. Because I think we're all used to this more and more. And this will increase more. In China, the number of packages get delivered on a daily basis, which includes the Swiggies and the Zomatos, which includes food as well, is about 115 million a day, 110 to 120 million a day. That number in India is only about 12 million, right?
Correct.
So, just imagine there's a 10x kind of a possible increase that can happen.
Right.
Which means that a lot of the behavior changes will also influence how logistics is run.
Right.
How people are influencing, how the influence is happening on things like real estate. So in China, they are building homes or flats without kitchens now. Because there are the millennials or people who are moving into these homes are saying that I don't need a kitchen anymore because I'm going to either eat out or I'm going to order in. I might have a microwave and a fridge where I might just keep something and just heat it up, etc. But there's no need for a kitchen. So the impact of omni-channel is to be seen, and it is going to be massive. So we run warehouses for some of the online retailers, and it's just been absolutely crazy in terms of the volume that we've churned out through our system. So omni-channel is going to stay, and as well as a major change. Multimodal is something that we've seen a big change. A lot of our customers that used to move by road realize that when roads are not, the trucks are not available, we started using rail and other modes. And some of them are so used to it now, they're saying that we are not going back to road. So that's a very, very visible trend.
Interesting.
And fortunately for us as a company, we have all of these product offerings. And so we were able to really give the customer a complete package in terms of solutions.
Fantastic. And it's really interesting what you mentioned about China and lack of kitchens, because our last interview was with Ankit Nagori, and he was a CBO of Flipkart, and now has started EatFit. And his hypothesis was that 15 years from now, we won't be cooking at home. And that was, he's setting up a business on that lines. But fantastic to hear about your business coming up and the increments that you're doing for your employees. The logistics sector overall is poised to grow at a 10.5% CAGR from now to 2025. Again, since this is a Carnegie Mellon interview, I have to ask you about technology and innovations in your particular company, as well as the logistics sector. We hear a lot about robotics being introduced at warehouses. We hear a lot about blockchain for synchronized transactions, the lack of paperwork, and IoT. So what are the biggest innovations coming out of TCI? How do you think about innovating in India and implementing? And yeah, what's your outlook on that?
So first, in terms of the larger and broader trends, robotics, etc., automation is coming about, but much slowly. In China, for example, and I'm going to China more often than talking about it versus the Western countries, is because I think we are more comparable to a country like China versus the West. So in China, the warehouses that are automated are less than 5% actually.
Really?
So the differential between human cost versus the cost of robotics and automation is still, the gap is still high, lesser in China, more in India. So it's moving a lot more slowly. Again, blockchain has started in some areas. I know there's work happening on the vaccination part with blockchain, and we are also working on a project with the government of India to see how blockchain can be used for documentation across the country. IoT, etc., are now becoming hygiene. So GPS related stuff, or sensor tracking. We have cold chain vehicles, and you can be sitting here and see the temperature of the vehicle wherever it is, temperature inside the vehicle, wherever it is. And that's a service quality offering that we give to our clients as well. So technology is absolutely critical to logistics. It is increasing a lot faster than we can see. Internally in the company, we've been very, very tech friendly as an organization. And in fact, in the 70s and 80s, we used to have these IBM punching card machines. So the big computers also, and that long ago. And we have a ingrown, homegrown software system that we've developed, because it's much faster in terms of reaction to changes. And Indian systems, as you know, has a lot of changes that are happening. A lot of our employee decision making has moved online to mobiles, not even online. So as you will have a company TCI app, and you as an individual, and you can be taking virtually almost, I would say 99% of your decisions through the app itself, with alerts, etc. that's happening. Customer interface is also clearly increased a lot. Not as much as I would like, but it is increasing. We've also set up a center of excellence for logistics in the company, which means that we're focusing on a large digital transformation projects. And the mandate to them is that let's look at not incremental changes, but exponential changes. So that's one area. And Other than that, about 5 years ago, I went to our board, since we're a listed company, and I requested the board that we would like to start making investments into startups in the supply chain and logistics field. Clearly, because we want to understand what's happening, we want
Right.
to, we don't want FOMO. We want to also participate wherever we can, and we made some good bets in the last few years, and I think it's helping us to get a better visibility of the supply chain and logistics market. So we are very, very clearly aligned towards technology,
Right.
and I think some of it also comes from the fact that when you're at CMU, you don't have a choice. So
You have a choice. Yeah.
yeah,
It's all around you. And it's good actually because it's futuristic, and it's good to see large organizations like yourself not stay buoyant and move with what you have, but also change with the times and investing in startups, which is again a great segue into the next part, which is one of your passions, as you mentioned, in addition to reading and marathons, was also investing in startups. Last year in 2020, India saw 425 million invested in supply chain startups, and 75% of that money went to late stage startups. So if you were to give advice to younger entrepreneurs who are entering the supply chain logistics space, what gaps would you advise them to attack? Like, that are unfulfilled, or, companies like TCI would like someone else to fulfill. And how should they go about entering the space, and what are the barriers to entry?
So there's a lot happening in this space, and there is one specific organization that recently ran an accelerator program, and they got almost 600 supply chain logistics startups that applied for that accelerator program. And then that organization, I think it's Loomis Partners, that ran the supply chain labs program. And I was part of the jury, and we saw some amazing companies. We shortlisted a few, it was 10 or 12, if I'm not mistaken. And everything was thought about, I mean, a lot of things were thought about from all the areas of blockchain or IoT, and areas like, for example, drones.
Right.
There are companies that are working very closely on that front. There are areas like documentation management or complete workflow process management. Those have a lot of what we use in the Japanese term called MUDA, waste. MUDA, MUDA is waste. So that is workflow management has a lot of potential, I think, in India, and also globally for that matter, because a lot of documentation is also global in that sense. There is tracking and visibility is improving quite a lot, quite fast, but I still think there are areas where there could be more data analytics related trending, or rather, I would not use the word AI, but ML that could come in more and more.
Okay.
For example, ETA or is not something that is very, very well defined, because many times if you would have ordered packages from several organizations, sometimes those get delivered like 2 or 3 days before it was supposed to get delivered. And sometimes they get delayed by a day or two. So that variation is very high, and that variation is because ETAs are not easily predictable right now, because the data is not fully available, and that I think the engines that run those have to be bigger and has to collect more data sets. And there's no major national company for GPS. We are working with something like, I think, close to 20 GPS providers today. And we bring in APIs from all of them to a single platform. And we can see all of them together. But if you are a national organization, you are forced to work with multiple organizations.
And is MapMy India part of that? Is that similar in what MapMy India is working?
Yeah, I mean, they are doing some work around that. But again, they are more on the map side and less on the service providing side for the GPS devices also, because a lot of the trucks, the older trucks, do not have any GPS on them.
Right.
And now the government has made it mandatory that all new trucks have to come with GPS embedded in them. But,
Oh, okay.
but the old trucks don't have them. So
Got it. Got it. So we are approaching our sorry Q&A segment. We'll go there in 5 minutes. So everyone, again, I would encourage you to put your questions in. Vineet has graciously agreed to stay on for a few minutes, 15 minutes more past 8 p.m. Indian time to answer questions. I can see already 7 questions that are in. Vineet, before I close out into the Q&A, last time we met at CMU, you spoke about giving back, the importance of giving back in your speech. I know TCI, of course, has its CSR programs, but we also spoke about your children's NGO, which is One Step Greener, and how you as a family are also, not only in terms of business, but as a family are giving back. So could you highlight what your children are doing with One Step Greener, and what example can that set for India Inc. to also think about giving back?
thank you. I think, the feeling about giving back is not a mandate, in the sense that CSR budgets are there from organizations, and we are forced to do that because of the pressure. But that's not true for us. My grandfather started the company in 1958, and in the mid 60s, when he made a little bit money, he had migrated from a remote village in Rajasthan. He went back and repaired the kunds and the wells, etc., in Rajasthan, because he wanted to give back right away. So the feeling of giving back has been there now for 50 plus years in the family, and we've been involved in doing a lot of work in all parts of the country, from Andamans to even in Leh, Kargil, where we built homes during the flash floods, etc. So the work continues, and we are committed to it in lots of areas, from sports to education, and of course now in the last few years, both my boys, who are now 16 and 13, started their own NGO, and their idea was waste management, in terms of why are we throwing away all the waste that we have, and it's all going to landfills. And the landfill issue was what bothered my boys a lot, and they decided to do something about it themselves. So first challenge was to convince people at home, and that took much longer than convincing people outside. So once they were able to do that, the idea is that they will collect the waste from each home and segregate it and give it directly to recyclers. So nothing goes to the landfills. And then they're also using the money that they're generating from that. They actually pay you to take your waste away. And they are using the whatever surplus funds they get after selling the waste. They use it for planting trees and urban reforestation. And so it's a big passion for them, and they've also won a few global awards. But I think it's the idea is that they're very connected to the fact that we have to do something. So I think that is we are very, very blessed that both from my side of the family and from my wife's side of the family, our forefathers, our parents have always encouraged us to give back.
Fantastic. And I think that's a lesson for every entrepreneur and every business house out there about sustainable growth. And it's fantastic to see 16 and 13. We just have to see which colleges they go to. Do they go to Carnegie Mellon or do they go to UPenn? We'll have to see. With that, I think we will move into the Q&A session. So Yash, if you can turn on your video, go ahead, pick your questions. I'll unmute whoever will ask the question. So the format for everyone is we will unmute you. You can ask your questions directly to Vineet, interact with him. That's part of what we want to do with our webinars, is give everyone access to the top minds. So go ahead, Yash.
Super. Ashay, again, Vineet, thank you so much for a very informative talk. And from the concept of what you or your family is doing, very inspirational. So like a lot of, for me as personally being a young entrepreneur coming back to India and working towards building a greener, sustainable India, I think there's so much to take away from. And I think some of the questions here are going to be focused towards that future and that stronger India that we're fighting for. So I think what we'll start off with is more towards what's happening presently. I think Alok, if you're still part of the call, can you unmute your mic? Ashay, go ahead.
Yeah, Bob, unmuted Alok. Alok, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for the great talk. I am a CMU grad in the robotics space, and I've been working a lot, with the AI, ML, and all the trends. So I do think that the logistics and the warehousing business in India, as it becomes bigger, like you said, right? It's fraction compared to China. So what are some of the bottlenecks that you already see that could benefit from automation or ML? I think you touched upon it, but that was my curiosity.
Yeah, so just to give an example, we run warehouses for online retailers, and online retailers typically have usually a flattish throughout the year sales, except when they have their sales. And so, if just an example of a specific warehouse where we typically would be doing, let's say, 25,000 orders a day. So that would be you've ordered this blue shirt of size 40 and of this particular color needs to get to you. We will do the picking and packing, invoicing, and keep it ready for dispatch. So that right inventory has to be there. So that's 20,000 of those orders a day. Now, when the sales happen, those orders go 3x, 4x a day. So we are doing 75,000 orders a day, 80,000 orders a day, and all of them have to be perfect. Because if you get a wrong shirt of the wrong color or size, you're going to scream your head off. So the criticality in that logistics is very high. The scalability is extremely high, which creates a lot of variability in the terms of our cost models, because we have to actually, if we typically have 100 people working, we have to add another 300 people and then actually de-roster them afterwards. So, and what has happened in the last year or 2 years or so, if you would have noticed, almost all of these retailers now have sales every month. Earlier, it used to be limited to Holi, Diwali, or festival, etc. Right. Now they have some reason to have a sale. So the variability factor, though you would think from one perspective that, okay, it's normalizing, but they don't pay you for that normalization. So they will not pay you that, okay, after 15 days, I'm going to have another sale. So keep those 300 people, and hence you normalize your base. But they say, no, you have to de-roster it again higher because we can't pay you for that extra. So I think the challenges around something like that would be very interesting from a warehousing perspective. But yeah, there are lots of other areas that can be looked at. And if you ever are, if you're based in India and if you're in Delhi, you're most happy to visit some of our warehouses and figure out what else could be done.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Great question, Alok, and an amazing answer. I think we need for us also to really recognize these bottlenecks, and a lot of the younger people who want to push in this direction, they require that sort of thinking and identification of areas from experienced people like yourself to really see how they can move forward and build a new business in that direction. I feel there's another question from Sunil Doshi, who speaks a little bit about a young entrepreneur being in the logistic company space. Ashay, do you want to unmute him?
Yes. It's unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Sunil.
My question was, is there any future for young entrepreneurs?
Sunil, sorry, your voice isn't, you're being very soft. Could you speak louder into the mic, please?
Is there any future for young entrepreneurs if they want to get into logistics?
Sorry, I didn't get that. I'm sorry.
The question is what is the future for young entrepreneurs getting into logistics, and what is the outlook, long-term outlook for economics in India?
I think the future is just fantastic in terms of the growth opportunities that are there in any business in India. If you fundamentally believe on the India story, and we are personally very long on India because the opportunities here are just phenomenal. The 99% of our business comes from India, and we are doubling down over here because we believe in this opportunity. And if if GDP grows, if businesses grow, logistics will grow as well.
Right.
So, and also there's a lot of, I would say, formalization of the economy started to happen. So as Ashaya earlier said, that 10-15% of the industry, the logistics industry is only formal,
Right.
which means that the opportunity for us to grow and add, not necessarily even if the pie is not increasing, but increase our share in the pie.
Correct.
That opportunity is also very, very high. So fundamentally, we are very, very confident, have high degree of confidence in the next decade. I would say next 10 to 15 years easily.
Fantastic.
Great. We move forward. I hope that answered your question, Sunil. We move forward to N.E.N. Venkat. If you can go ahead and unmute.
Yep, and I'd request everyone who's asking the question to introduce themselves as well. So go ahead, please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, hi Vineet. Thanks for this opportunity to understand from experts like you and leaders like you. As you touched in your talk about the multimodal service, that has got a long way to reduce the cost as well as improve the service. The railways is looking towards improving this aspect. But do you see this as something like Konkan Railway had started it many years ago, but it's for a very small stretch in the overall network. Do you see this as being a bigger part of the railways network? And for these kind of things to grow, do you see it as something which you need 5 years, 10 years, or a little less?
Thanks, Venkat. The way to look at this is not necessarily thinking about the trucks always going on top of the rail. That's what happens in Konkan. But that's not always the most efficient because the truck is not going to be utilized for that period, right? So it's creating a little bit more inefficiency. But if you're able to move the container and put it on the rail network and at the destination take it out, that might be almost as fast as actually the truck going up and down. So I think you have to think about the issue from a perspective of both the throughput of the assets that are there, whether it is a container, whether it is the truck, versus just looking at the shift in the mode. So clearly modal shift will happen. The DFC, the dedicated freight corridor, part of it is already constructed. The number of train, so DFC will ensure that the train, that let's say if the train is of 750 meters in length today, it will become 1.5 kilometers in length. So double the length. You can carry double the containers. Instead of one layer of containers, you can have another layer of containers and double the speed. So you're looking at an 8x kind of an improvement in terms of productivity. That would mean a lot of, and I do not know what the price would be. That's not yet released by the government, but that would essentially mean that a lot of people will want to use that as a mode rather than a truck. So we as an organization are also looking at this very carefully, and we have a joint venture with Concor to handle the rail logistics in the country. So we are also in that space as well, and it is very, very exciting right now.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yash, so Vineet, what we'll do now, since we're getting close to 8, we'll invite Rekha just to say a word of thanks. And then for everyone in the audience, we will continue the Q&A. Vineet has agreed to stay on longer. So Rekha, if you can turn on your video real quick, give your closing comments, and then we can go into the Q&A again.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you once once again to all our participants for coming here and attending. I know it's a weeknight, and thank you for taking this time out, and I hope you enjoyed the session as much as we have enjoyed, listening to Vineet. Vineet, it's been kind of really fascinating. We've not had a talk on this, topic of logistics and supply chain management. And it's been very interesting to listen to you and all your insights. And I don't want to take much time away now from the Q&A. So let me hand it over back to Ashay and to Yash rather to go ahead with the Q&A. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Rekha. Thank you so much.
Hope we can host you in presence sometime
And likewise if you're in Delhi.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Rekha. We'll just directly jump back into the questions. I think the next set of questions are more related to the future of India, the e-mobility direction. I think what we can start with is Shrikant has put up a message on the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor being an example for EV trucks. Shrikant, please go ahead.
Shrikant, I've unmuted you, so please unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Hi, Vineet. Yeah.
Hi,
Am I audible? Yeah. So since we are
Shrikant, your voice is cutting in and out quite a bit. So I don't know if your connectivity is strong.
Yash, why don't you just...
Yeah, Shrikant,
integrated player in the e-bus and EV trucks based out of Bangalore. So with a lot of action happening on. Yeah. Sorry. I'm just in a bit of a. Yeah, I'm just happened to be a bit of a remote place. So I think it should be. Yeah. So my question is very specific now.
Shrikant, sorry, your voice is cutting out quite a bit. Shrikant, I'm so sorry, your voice is cutting out in and out a little bit. Let Ashay, if you want to go ahead and unmute it for a little bit.
Shrikant, if I can answer the question that you've typed in.
No commercial viable truck platform.
Yeah, I think I get that in terms of the question. Can Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor be an example for Indian EV trucks, and is there a techno-commercial viability for the same? I think that is a possibility. However, I think the battery sizes versus the horsepower output is not yet there, because if you want to carry more heavier load, you need more batteries, and that reduces the load on the trucks. So that balance in terms of the battery sizes as well as the load is still getting there, I would say. But it is definitely doable. And I think we are seeing that the technology is evolving quite rapidly. I would be very happy to, even if anyone is interested, to experiment with our cargo with EV trucks in the country. And I would be looking for a day when not just the Delhi-Mumbai, but many corridors would be such corridors would be developed.
Awesome.
Super, Vineet. We'll jump straight into the next question, which is quite closely linked by Rahul Walawalkar. Ashay, would you like to unmute him and bring him on as well? Rahul, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Yash and Ashay. So hi, Vineet. I'm Rahul Walawalkar. I'm founder and president of India Energy Storage Alliance. So I've been working for the last 8 years on both stationary and e-mobility area. And also I wanted to thank you for the work which you are doing at ASSOCHAM. In fact, ASSOCHAM is the one of the largest alliance with whom we as ISA have a MOU for working collaboratively for accelerating the e-mobility. So thank you for that. So my question is that you're right that for in terms of the trucks, especially right now, I think in India, the work is not happening as much on the electrification, but do you see a big adoption happening on the last mile connectivity with home deliveries and other thing? And as a PCI, have you already started adopting EVs? And the other aspect was not just in terms of looking at batteries for EVs, but we have also seen a lot of opportunities for improving the cold chain logistics with thermal storage, and many good startups from India using waste change materials have come in. So what is your outlook on both these technologies and how some of the startups or new companies who are coming in can work with TCI for accelerating this?
And just to quickly add on to that, Vineet, what Rahul mentioned about electrification, with the rising fuel costs, do you think that's your inflection point for electrification as well? Because fuel gets more expensive, you're kind of forced to move towards electrification. But go ahead.
Yeah, so electrification or move towards EV is obvious. I think this is a given. It's a question of finding the right equation. Certainly, what you mentioned, Rahul, for the last mile, that has a lot of potential because the weight that you're carrying is far lesser versus the amount of the horsepower that you really need, and hence the battery capacity that you need. So we certainly believe that this will start to play out more and more. We do not do a lot of last mile home delivery kind of B2C, very little in our express business, but we do more B2B kind of activities because we've seen that the B2C element is very, very competitive, and a lot of startups have come in there and they're just using private equity money to really drive volumes in this. So drive cost down, in fact. So we have, but we are excited about this. We started talking to a few people who are interested. We have certain areas where even the B2B element can be used. So we'll be very happy to partner with yourself or any other organization in this space. So please drop me an email or drop me. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can send me a message via LinkedIn, and we can connect to the right teams.
Yeah, thanks, Vineet. We'll definitely follow up on that because we have actually launched the initiative last year called EV Adopters Circle, where we are trying to specifically focus on more on the commercial vehicles, and because again, that's a sector which I think the economics is already good, so we don't need to wait for government subsidies for that or waiting for price to come down. So we'll definitely approach you and take further inputs from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, Rahul. Actually, that your questions really moved into a very important question, also asked by Rajiv Jaisinghani, if he's still on the call, related to last mile delivery and some advice towards that. Go ahead, Rajiv.
Hi. Thank you, Yash and Ashay, and good to attend this seminar. Just wanted to know that we are in the business of processed meats. So what options do we have from TCI or other such operators, apart from the city-to-city transport, or if there is any last mile linkages that you offer at TCI? I think the earlier question also, I think you broached upon, saying that, okay, not too many options are available through TCI for a B2C kind of a thing, but in going forward, do you think that business is rising, and do you feel that it'll be a good opportunity for TCI also to step in?
No, not right now. Again, this is our philosophy of the company has been a little bit more different, and I haven't shared this, but we've been a little conservative and not necessarily the first mover in every space because we try to look at things more pragmatically. And we believe a lot in the consistency of our business. So if you would have invested into our stock about 18 years ago, you would have got about a 35% CAGR return. It is because we've really thought about things, not necessarily always rushing to do the thing that seems very attractive at that point. And last mile looks very attractive, but really it doesn't make any money. So we've been a little careful around it, and we do B2B side that, as I said, we run large warehouses for, let's say, FMCG companies, and their model is that you send it first to the distributors, and we do those kind of deliveries. But they would be larger package sizes, maybe 100 kilos, 200, 300 kilos, 500 kilo kind of sizes versus, a few grams. So we don't intend to get into that space. But yeah, there are lots of companies that are there.
But are you also doing reefer transport and also cold storages?
Yes, we are. Yes, we have a a cold chain company, TCI Cold Chain Solutions. And there we have about 120 odd trucks. And we also have cold storage all over the country, which are not just meant for food, but also do medicines and specialty chemicals. There are lots of chemicals in that really need an ambient temperature or lower than average temperature because they can be unstable. So we do that kind of specialized work as well.
All right, because we are again based out of Delhi, Gurgaon, with plants in Haryana, and specifically dealing in processed meat products. So we do use your reefer trucks, but wasn't really sure about the cold storage operations. So we do take a lot of your vehicles on a city-to-city transport, but definitely would like to see cold storages for our storage spaces at various locations.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much for your business, and please send me your email, and I will get a team to look at it.
Sure. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, Rajiv. Also, that's again very informative. I think some more questions around perishable logistic options. You mentioned cold storage. Vineet, are there other options that you guys are considering for perishables, or I know you said no B2C, so on the B2B market, I don't know how that may be, but is that also a space that you guys consider?
Yes, of course. I think, perishables and the food and the agri supply chain is a huge opportunity, and it has been more so in the pandemic, where we're seeing the opportunities really accelerating now. So we are doing a lot of work around that. We work with QSRs as well. We work with dairy and all kinds of food companies as well. So we are running both, we have warehouses where we can do cold as well as dry. So let's say if it's a pizza company and they require flour, which is going to be dry, and they require cheese, which is going to be of a certain temperature, and certain items that are frozen. So we have a multi-temperature truck. We have 3 temperatures on the truck. That we have 3 compartments, 3 areas. So you can take all 3 items and deliver it to that particular store for them to use it and start their processing. So these customized solutions are also something that we are building.
Great. I believe the question was asked by Rajiv, and I think he may have dropped out of the call. So I was just asking it further. I think we'll.
I was very much on the call, so I was just listening to know what the conversation was.
No,
so
no,
sorry,
no, sorry, Rajiv, not you. Another Rajiv had posted a question.
All right.
So, going forward, I think we have a question revolving GPS providers and the inefficiencies regarding that. Priyanka, are you still on the call? And if so, can
That's my wife and my son.
Hi, Dad.
Great questions.
So yes, go ahead, Behan. That's my older son.
Hi, Dad. So basically, you talked about the multiple GPS providers in India. So I was just wondering, are there like any other such problems that could potentially not only hamper growth but slow growth in the logistics space, and could also be potential opportunities in your opinion?
Why do you have to ask these questions now and not on the dinner table?
No, it's so everyone's benefit, Dad.
I wish I could ask us questions at 16. I wasn't thinking about this stuff.
Yes. Well, so yeah, I mean, there are lots of inefficiencies I talked about, from using head loads. People carry things on head, and so when you're obviously a little heavier product, you just throw it down. So there's going to be damages. There's going to be issues around inefficiencies like that. So building a palletized infrastructure of products is very critical. Palletization doesn't work too well in India, also in some places, because the spaces are not there. You go to a store or a wholesaler distributor, there's not enough space for a pallet to go in many places. So that's also changing with modern retail, modern trade coming about, where people are happy to where they have much larger facilities to really receive cargo as well. So that's one huge thing. Palletization is massive. Containerization is massive. These can really be opportunities, and they do hamper growth as well. And the rest I can tell you separately, Vihan.
Great. I hope that answers your question, Vian. We'll move forward
Yeah.
to. Great, awesome. We'll move forward to Rahul Rathi. I hope I pronounced your name right. If you want to unmute your mic.
Rahul, Rahul Rathi, you're unmuted. So please unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, Vineet. Always a pleasure to listen to you here.
Hi, Rahul. How are you?
Hey, doing well. So my question was that, and this is something that I've been grappling with and engaged with a lot of leadership, is the next decade is going to be very different for all of us leaders. You know, youngsters don't want to join traditional companies. There's a lot of excitement. You work with a lot of different people in teams. And given that you have been an impactful leader with both success in the peer domain as well as in the company, what's your mantra for leadership in the next decade? And I'm assuming, like me, what I have done in the last 2 decades probably is not relevant given the changes going forward.
Yeah, Rahul, thanks. Thanks for asking all the tough questions always. But no, so, I don't think what we've done in the last 2 decades is necessarily irrelevant. A lot of that is relevant still. I think the value systems that we have created or built or live by are going to be relevant even as we go ahead. Because those are things that guide us irrespective of whatever else is happening around us. What will not change, for example, is discipline. I think discipline in the way that a person conducts themselves, a person operates a business as a person, that discipline is very critical. So, personally, if we have quarterly meetings, we will have those quarterly meetings if they're set up, monthly meetings. The rigor in all of those things are very, very important for any organization. What will not change is trust, for example. Our organization, we do not, for the last 20 years, my brother and I, who are active in the business, have not signed a single check. So the reason is because we entirely trust our company, the people, the team that is there. Trust will not change, discipline will not change, value systems, and these are all, I guess, in some ways, part of the value system. What you definitely one would need is being more empathetic, because that is, I think, the way that businesses were run were not thought ever in terms of the triple bottom line. They always thought about making profit only. So I think that is a big change, and all of us will have to change towards that, adapt towards that. I don't need to say anything about technology. I think that's a given. Digital transformation in anything and whatever we are doing is just absolutely necessary. And if you're not getting ready for that, you're going to be a dinosaur for sure. And also, I think from a country perspective, a long-term thinking is also important, because we've also seen that in India, long-range planning doesn't exist. Even when you go to banks in the past, about 10 years ago, it's changed a bit now. I would tell them that, look, I'm building this warehouse, but I need a 10-year loan. No, that's not possible. We've not seen 10 years. Kahan 10 years mein kya hoga? So that long-range thinking doesn't exist. And I always joke about this with a lot of people, is because maybe because we Indians think that we are going to be reborn, and we are going to be reborn 9 times or whatever X number of times. And if we don't complete what we wanting to do in this lifetime, next lifetime mein to kar hi lenge. So perhaps that's something that gives us that execution and long range thinking doesn't exist to that level. So that would be very, very important also, broadly speaking.
Right. Thanks, yeah, Vineet. You know, it's always interesting listening to your perspective, balancing the new and the old. Yeah.
Thanks, thank you.
You know, I'm as a CMU alum like you, I'm going to ask, you know, how has CMU contributed where you are today and going forward? How relevant is it today? So forget, I know it was relevant when we graduated.
The trickiest question of the moment.
No, but Vineet knows how to answer tricky questions. It's no fun if you give him easy questions, you know. That he will do anytime, yeah.
Thanks for the confidence, Rahul. So you know, I think, and I'm going to deflect that in a different manner because I think it's not CMU only, but any organization, any institution at that undergrad level is, and if it's a high quality institution, I think it's their teaching should help you in your way of thinking, in the way that you think. So how can you ensure that you absorb information that's coming from all sources everywhere, perspectives, opinions, and channel it in the right way and the right direction. So any undergrad degree, whether it is an engineering or not an engineering or anything, I think should be important to guide you in terms of how you think. So I think certainly CMU is an extremely high quality organization from that perspective, that has drilled some of this into us through the workload that we used to get at school and cry every semester. But I think it is that critical thing that I have seen, and for many of us, many Indians who move there, is also the independence of thought. I think that development is also very, very important and has been very critical. So yeah, so I think it's not just CMU. CMU has huge amount of positive with the technology background that we all had, but there's a lot more to it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. You know, for me, it was spending time with Herb Simon. Have you heard of him?
Yes,
He's a father of AI, Nobel Prize winner. You know, I took a lecture and similar thoughts, but some more that we'll chat offline. I was just going through my email and I found his email right there. Yeah,
So,
you're saying
you know, I ended up, Rahul, doing a triple major at CMU, and my third major was decision support sciences. And decision support sciences was one of the places where Herbert Simon was working very intricately, and I did attend a few of his lectures as well.
Yeah, we are very lucky here to have such professors here. But thanks here. You know, there's another one in you who can share. And I see Professor Kekre there. Good evening, sir. He also taught me a long time ago. Yeah.
I think we can get Professor Kekre for his question. He's been an avid attender of all these sessions and taught. So Professor Kekre, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, can you hear me, Vineet?
Yes, I can.
Well, first of all, thanks. All the lectures that Akshay is sort of organizing have been very beneficial to me to keep in touch with what's happening in India and people like you who are doing interesting things. See, at TEPA, we have lots of examples we give our students from the United States, from Amazon and others. Could you share with us some interesting things that TCI has done, recognizing Indian mindset, Indian constraints, some innovation in terms of either design or execution in logistics that we can showcase to our students that things are happening in India also?
I mean, there are lots. I could tell you hundreds of things. I can give you some, for example, we set up, you know, when we transport cars, and when we transport the cars were typically in 2 layers. So in the trucks, so we actually added a third layer, a collapsible third layer, so that we can have 3 layers of bikes. And so we also applied for a patent from our organization on that. And so that was successfully for many years. We went to for a garment apparel company when they had clothes, when the clothes used to come to the warehouse, and we were asked to iron the clothes and put them on hangers to deliver it to the stores, because they don't need to open the boxes in the stores. They just wheel it in directly. And when they used to do that, the table that was there, I mean, this is very simple, but this is an MNC. And the idea around that table was that, your table has 4 corners. But we looked at it and said, look, it's wrong to have 4 corners. Why don't you round off the corners? Because some cloths are going to get stuck, and they did get stuck and used to get torn. So, I mean, there's, plenty of such Kaizen and some ways Jugaad, some places innovations that we've been doing and that exist in the marketplace.
Wonderful thing. And one more point I didn't get in, I was looking through some of your presentations. How has GST promoted centralization of larger warehouses? I didn't get the connection between GST and larger warehouses that you made. What is the link? Am I missing something?
Yeah, so, with GST, pre-GST, you needed to have a warehouse in every state if you wanted to sell in that state.
You had to by law?
By law, yes.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, you used to pay something called a CST, Central Sales Tax, which would have been 2% more or 3%. So rather than doing that, you would put up a warehouse in that specific state, in every state.
Okay.
Versus now you can have, instead of, a large state like Uttar Pradesh, where you would typically have 3 warehouses, you can centralize it into 1 warehouse.
Right. Now I got it. No, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
The other question I had was, and this is something that's worried me in the US. Last Christmas, one of my relatives, she ordered 20 jackets from North Face, ridiculous, and returned 19 of them, and without cost through FedEx and so on. What's the things in India? Do you pay for the reverse logistics of things you return, or you don't?
No, you don't pay, and the reverse is about between 25 to 35%, depending upon the type of industry.
Right. Yeah.
And
so isn't that going to impose cost in terms of carbon footprint of reverse logistics for these items? Customer has to be trained not to do these things,
It's absolutely right. You're absolutely. I mean, this is a wastage in terms of resources. So I think we have to be more cognizant of it. Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Vineet. Love to meet you in Delhi when I come.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir.
We wouldn't have a supply chain conversation without a professor of operations. So it's great that Professor Kekre has been so supportive. Go ahead, Yash.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks a lot, Professor Kekre. It was really nice question. Great. If you don't mind, could you mute your mics, please, Rahul and Professor Kekre? Thank you very much. We're just about passing the 8:30 mark. I hope you have questions, but we have, I think, 2 more questions to go through. If you don't mind, Vineet, we'll go ahead and get into those 2.
Sure.
Great. I think our next question is from Shabar. If you want to go ahead, which is a more open-ended question towards international expansion.
Hey, Vineet, thanks for the informative discussion so far. Was just wondering, you had one of the largest logistics companies in India. Do you have any plans to go international, taking a leaf out of, say, TVS Logistics book? Or are you more focused on India at the moment?
So Shabar, we did go overseas, and we had offices in about 17, 18 countries, as far as Brazil. But we were making heavy losses in all these entities, and we took a call to shut it all down. So I think it was the wrong timing, or whatever be the situation, but we exited all these countries, barring Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. We believe that with the India story, these few countries that are neighboring countries will also benefit a lot from the India story and with the India story. So we are quite focused on these areas. We've established our our own offices, and we intend to stick by this sort of rule, and also ideally follow the customer's strategy in many of these places.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot, Shabar. I think just for the case of time, and the last question being slightly more on the technical side, and we can try and keep that separate. Oh, we got one more question that's come in. But for these, I think what we'll do for now, Vineet, instead of going ahead and answering these questions, is I think Ashay, if you want to take it away and put in for the last closing comments. Vineet, thank you so much, and thank you all attendees for paying attention, being part of the call all the way through the end. Really apologize, Srikanth and Antriksha, for not being able to answer those last two questions. But if we want, we can try and get those done offline. Ashay, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Vineet, the fact that over 30 to 40 people stayed till 8:30 at night, half an hour after the scheduled time, is testament to how great and informative this talk was. My takeaways from the last time I met you in person to when we spoke on the phone was the element of long-term thinking and the willingness to put discipline and struggle, especially if you want to grow in India. So thank you for your thoughts, your thought leadership, and moving the country forward. Before we end, I would love to have you say like a few closing comments on your experiences, and we would love to have you again for future events that we do.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I think I've spoken enough for the last 90 minutes. So I don't have much to say except go Tartans.
That's always a great message. Rekha, any last words?
No, that's fine. I think thank you very much again, Vineet. And I think Go Tartans is a good note to end this on.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we will put up the recordings and the highlights of this via email, and we'll keep in touch. So Vineet, thank you again for your time. Have those conversations with Vihan and the family at the table.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.